Hello, welcome to Skye Sweaty Record Review, episode 108. It's the only first listen new music review show hosted by a French professor immediately after leaving the YMCA. It's been a long time, and I shouldn't have left you without some dope beats to sweat to. I've had the flu, so I got back from Chicago, the Star Wars thing, and then I got the flu. And I can't go to the gym and listen to new music when I got 104 fever. So I haven't recorded an episode in a little while. And as you can tell, I'm still not feeling great. And I'm not right back from the gym because, I got to recover. So instead of recording this episode, I have to listen to new music. I got to record 3 episodes a week. That's just what I want to do. I want to listen to 3 new albums a week. That's my goal. So what I did was I listened to a new album on the way into work. And I am going to talk about that now. So it's by Czarface. And last time I talked about Czarface was like 3 weeks ago. I don't know. It was it was very recently. And it was their album with Ghostface Killah. And I loved it. And I talked about how great it was. And Esoteric, the rapper on the album, actually watched my review and gave me positive comments. And it was really great. So when I saw they released a new album, first of all, I was like, what the hell? Just released one. And then I didn't really know what it meant. So, while I was there and blowing my nose and coughing and praying for death, I looked up this album, just on Google, right? It's called Double Dose of Danger. And I realized it's part of this new record store day. And so the way I was introduced to Czarface was actually hearing about this. That what they do is they release a comic book with a record that's the soundtrack to that comic book. And I first heard about that a couple years ago. And I missed it. I didn't buy it, and it's too expensive on eBay. And so then when I saw that they released this, I checked in with the Record Archive in Rochester. They're sold out. So I missed it again. So it's this really fun idea where they're trying to recreate the soundscape of those old listening albums, the feeling you used to have back in the 70s and 80s, if you don't know. You'd get these records with these little comic books and you'd listen and they'd tell you when to flip the page. And, you'd just be exciting and fun and you'd read and you'd have a little soundtrack. So it's this whole concept. It's the 4th time that they've done this. And it's the 4th time that I don't actually have the comic book. So I'm going to be reviewing this just based on looking at the image on the cover of the album. I'll show you what that looks like here on my computer. It's like this guy who's Czarface, their totem, their icon, their avatar, attacking a poacher. So that's all I had to go on while I listened to this album. It's like a half an hour album of instrumental music. So I had to imagine. I had to look at the names of the songs and imagine what was happening in the comic book that I couldn't read. Beautiful Beast, Enemies in Ivory, Elephant Gun, Thieves and Junkies, Poach the Poacher, Clap Clap, Gun Charges, Chromed Out, Masked in the Alley, and Rystarr's theme. I had to just allow my imagination to fill the spaces. And it reminded me of something that happened in high school. So a lot of people, when they're in high school, hear about the song Shaft by Isaac Hayes. Everyone knows it. It's a funny song. It's oddly sexual, and it's just a great song. It's a great example of 70s funk. And people listen to it sort of ironically, people listen to it seriously, and it's an amazing, interesting song, particularly in the way that young men react to it, because the sexuality of it is off. It's not very clear exactly what they're always talking about. So I think it's sort of an introduction to a lot of sort of themes of male sexuality, and then just the guitar riff with wah wah chaka waka wah. It's just so snappy and it's so catchy. And if you're like me, you thought it was so great that you wanted to learn more. So you bought the Shaft soundtrack. And that's what I did. I bought the Shaft soundtrack back in the 90s and I listened to it. But I'd never seen the movie. It wasn't even available on VHS, at least not where I lived. So I was in the same position as I was with this album. A soundtrack to something that I'd never seen, never read. And the second track on the Shaft soundtrack. It's a great piece of trivia. It's Bumpy's Lament. It's this kind of downbeat, sad song by Isaac Hayes. And I remember listening to it thinking like, who's Bumpy? What does lament mean? And I got out my dictionary. Oh, sadness or regret. Wow, what's Bumpy sad about? You know, and there's another song later on, a little upbeat song called Shaft's Taxi Ride, you know, and it's mostly instrumental. And the first track, you know, drags you in and you love it, and, you know, who's the sex machine doll, the chicks and all that. But the rest of it is this amazing, I've used amazing like 10 times today, doesn't matter, is this incredible, astounding even, instrumental soul funk album. By the way, Isaac Hayes may be the most underrated artist of the 20th century. That's for another video, but my God, I love Isaac Hayes. So I kind of had that sense listening to this, and it makes sense too with what the nature of this album is. It has a very 70s soundscape to it, very kind of lots of sort of intentional effects put on all the instruments to give it kind of a crunchy feeling. I'll give you an example of how some of these things sound and how some of them feel. In particular, I really like the tracks that use saxophone a lot, like this track Enemies and Ivory, track 2 on the album.
Yeah, this one sound crispy.
How are they? Can we just say?
So you hear that like crazy high saxophone that goes in there, and then later on the song Chromed Out, there's another saxophone that comes in. Kind of like a low light, chilled out saxophone track. But in general, the whole thing is extremely solid. I mean, I'll just play just another track, just almost randomly, like clap, clap. So it has those like, almost like 70s or 80s cartoon sound effects in the background. The drums are heavily processed, you know, like there's layers of phasers on top of it. I don't know exactly how they do it. Really heavy on the bass, nice, sparse 70s sounding bass. And basically, the only lyrics on the entire album is just a quote from Esoteric saying, yeah, this one's crispy. And someone saying, Czarface. Like, that's about it. But it's really enjoyable. If you just listen to it, the atmosphere that they're able to create. And maybe the best track on the album is the last one, Rystarr's theme. I assume Rystarr is a character in the comic book. I don't know. I don't have the comic book. So here's that one. What's amazing about this one is it has like this clarity to it. Like this nice flute line that you hear as a lead.
Yeah, this one sound crispy.
Yeah, this one sounds crispy.
Right now, I feel that.
And then so it has, you know, lots of filters on the drums. You can actually hear that really sort of phaser sound in the background throughout the whole thing. It sounds like it's trying to sound 70s, but it has this clarity to it. I don't really know how they are doing it. I say they, but I think this whole thing is just 7L, the producer. I don't think the other members of Czarface are doing anything, unless I'm wrong. But just listen to that for a second.
Yeah, this one sound crispy.
Just excellent. And I don't know. I mean, are they going to rap over this eventually? I hope so. I mean, how does this guy do it? How does 7L do it? I mean, it makes it seem like it's easy making beats like this. Just to release this sort of like, yeah, I'm just going to release an album of instrumental tracks that are all better than most of the things that have been produced in the last couple of years. I'll just throw them out there for this like goofy comic book plan. I don't know. I don't know what 7L is doing, but he is producing amazing music, all in this kind of wheelhouse. And I was trying to think about how am I going to define this album. And I kind of set the bar pretty high for myself for the last Czarface, calling it the 1986 Celtics of hip-hop. But I think I've done it again. Maybe not that well. But The other thing that this reminds me of is, you know, I talk about how it's trying to sound like those records, you know, you listen to in the 70s and 80s, you know, and when you hear the ding, turn the page, you know. But also, it reminded me a lot, the soundscape of like Super Friends and like the 70s cartoons that were like not great. But the thing was, when you were a kid and you were watching Super Friends, when you were watching the Spider-Man cartoon, you know, with all those weird far out sounds, and like all these superheroes, you didn't know it wasn't great. So like, this album feels like Super Friends used to feel. So like, if you just look at it now, the music's not good, the animation's not good, the stories aren't good. But when you were younger and you were lost in that world, that exciting world, either of the storybook or of the cartoon, like, it seemed a lot cooler and it seemed a lot bigger than it really was. So if I had to describe this album, I'd say it's a combination between that and the feeling of listening to the Shaft soundtrack. Like a cool soundtrack with good atmosphere, lots of instrumental music that is as good as any other music that's made, and much like you get the sense that 7L can just throw music out, just make it great. Same thing with Isaac Hayes on the Shaft soundtrack, where it's really this great atmosphere in the soundtrack to something where the thing itself is not as good as the soundtrack. So that's why I call this album Shaft meets the Super Friends. Because it's got that cool 70s blaxploitation feel mixed in with the sort of nerdy cartoon feel for the sum that is a highly enjoyable, thematically consistent instrumental album that I am going to listen to in addition to the rest of the Czarface stuff. So there it is. I'm going to try to go to the gym and record a regular video today. My girlfriend's going to be pissed because she doesn't want me like working out too much and allowing myself to rest. But it's been like a week. All right. Until next time, whenever that is, there's the camera. There's the camera.